background?
I don't know. Is it gonna make us look weird?
I don't know, actually. Oh no, we're here. Hey, oh no. We can blur it.
That's
The
funny.
background. Oh, but you're blurred out.
I guess this only works for one person. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Monte, she, her, a Modern Classrooms expert mentor and middle school science teacher, and I reside in Atlanta, Georgia.
Hi, everyone, and I'm Toni Rose, she, her pronouns, a modern classroom program manager and a former middle school English teacher. And as you can see, I'm also in Atlanta, Georgia with Monte. I'm only here for the week though, but this is Keeping Up with Modern Classrooms. So just a quick background in case you're just joining us this month. Monte and I worked together at DCI, where she was the middle school, science teacher, and then I was the English teacher. So, and we just never turned back, and that was in 2019.
When we left?
Yeah.
Or
2019 was when we started implementing the model.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes.
We should have this by now. Anyways.
Let us get started. So every time we do this, we like to start off with our member of the month shout out. And this month, for the month of September anyway, our person was Ashley Brown. We have noticed the videos that you've been posting. They are super engaging and just super helpful. So we love that you're posting things. If you're new to the Facebook group, every month we shout out a member of the month. We also do a person of the week, 2 people of the week. And you get stickers, and if you're the member of the month, you get a t-shirt. So just keep posting, keep being awesome, and keep, asking for questions and things like that. But anyway, let us go ahead and get started with our topic of the month, which is keeping learning continuous.
So we're going to be talking about how to continue learning even when the student is absent, or when the teacher is absent, or when a student is behind, or a student's not mastering something. We've just been getting a lot of questions in our Facebook group about, hey, what do we do to keep our students motivated? What do we do to keep our students on pace? And what happens when there's different things that we just are not understanding, right? And so with that, we're really excited. We're trying to figure out a clever title for today's episode. We're thinking all we do is learn.
Yes.
Or learning all day, every day. I don't know. We're working on it, but go ahead, Monte.
So we went in and we pulled 5 questions out of the Facebook group that we had noticed that were kind of on topic of what we wanted to talk about for the month. So the first question that we have is essentially about the teacher role. So how do you keep yourself from running around the room the whole period, feeling like you don't have time to interact with everybody, and then not really getting help to the kids that need it most? And so this is where we want to start our conversation.
So for me, I really like getting my steps in the classroom. So I didn't mind running around. And Monte and I were talking about this earlier too, is that when we first started with Modern Classroom, it did seem like we were chicken with our heads cut off, just like running around trying to figure out how are we going to best serve our students and support our students, right? And so in some of our models, you'll know that there's an instructional nest. So you can be posted up in that specific desk where students actually come to you for help whenever they need to. There's some other ways too where teachers post it on the whiteboard, like kind of like a waiting line. And this is something that Monte and I talked about through the classroom queue. And it's all digital where students can just have a waiting line online so that you can see who's going to come see you next. But it does feel like that in the beginning. You'll get used to it not get used to it, but you'll modify whatever works for you. But in the beginning of the model, implementing the model, you will feel like a chicken with your head cut off, going all around the classroom. And for me, I just had a stool that I carried around with me so that I would get posted beside like the student wherever they're working, because it kept me just kind of moving around. But then if, the students are also able to approach me whenever they needed to. And Monte, on the other hand.
Yeah, no, I was a fan of, I did move around the room, but I used like my whiteboard, but I split my whiteboard into parts. So it was, I need help immediately. I need help, but it can wait. And I finished a lesson or I finished an assignment and I want to check in. And so kids kind of put their name on that list. And obviously I prioritize the kids who say, I need help immediately. What I liked about this is that sometimes the kids that thought, oh, I need help immediately, they actually found somebody else to ask their question to. And by the time I got to them, like, oh, I just forgot to erase my name, which, like, again, is a little bit of my time wasted. But it's nice that when they sit long enough and you kind of give them that time, they actually find somebody else to answer their question. Or they find they actually didn't have a question to begin with. My eyes look giant, sorry. They actually find out that they don't have a question. So I think find a system that is going to work for you. But you definitely don't need to feel like you're running around over and over like a chicken with your head cut off. But again, I was like that in the beginning, and it took Kareem, who is the CEO of the organization, to be like, Monte, you can chill out here and make the kids come to you. And so depending on the day, I kind of alternated between if I went to them or had them come to me.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense too. And I think there was another question about having students, like making students work with each other, and also just like being student leaders. And this is something that Monte and I were talking about earlier too, is that we don't really want to force students to do anything, right? Like we want them to own, we want them to be accountable for their learning. We want them to own all of it. So if they decided that they wanted to help students out, then that would be really cool. But I think having that conversation with students who's open to help other students, to be student group leaders, that's also, it's possible. But we don't really want to force our students to work with each other as like a teacher and a student, right? Because sometimes, like, if a student's not really into it, they're just going to give the answers and there's really no learning happening. And so what would you say about keeping students motivated and on pace and like having student leaders?
I think my biggest thing, especially when it comes to like keeping kids on pace, is like be really hard with, like, it's okay to have like hard deadlines that are not really hard deadlines. And what I mean by that is communicate to them that's a hard deadline, put a soft zero or some sort of factor that is going to kind of light a fire under their butt, but then give them the option to still go back. Maybe you don't use class time for that, but maybe you still give them the option to work on it. So for me, for example, I was, a little bit of a micromanager with this. And, for those micromanagers out there, I salute you because you're in the same boat. And so I self-pace my kids together by lesson, as opposed to like the whole unit. We self-pace together by lesson. And so if I was giving them 6 days for a lesson, we worked on within that 6 days. And if a kid finished up before the end of the 6 days, they worked on something else. If a kid took the 6 days, that's fine. But on day 6, everybody took the mastery check. And then we moved on to the next lesson. Now, the question that people typically ask me is, well, what do you do about the kids who like didn't actually finish it? Or did you make them take the master check? I sure did. At day 6, they took the master check, whether they were done or not, which communicated whether they knew it or not. And then if they wanted to go back and fix grades or finish the lesson, which as most of my kids did, because they didn't like looking at the grade or anything like that, they did it for homework or if they had extra time. And a lot of times it actually motivated them a lot more to like get the stuff at hand done so they can go back and do it. So I think just being firm on like your deadlines and your expectations, it is totally okay. I feel like sometimes in this model, we forget, our classroom management and like the same things we would do in a traditional class to get them to do the things still apply. So don't be afraid to be firm with them. It's totally okay. They're not going to like you any less. Maybe in that moment they will, but I promise you, you'll still be their favorite teacher.
Yeah, and hands down with the hard deadlines, you can have as many hard deadlines as you want in a unit. You don't necessarily have to wait until the very last week of the unit to have a hard deadline, right? So there was a teacher that I was speaking where they had a hard deadline every 3 weeks actually. And so just to make sure that students are on pace and that they're using their time wisely. Now, I know, like, give yourself grace, like give your students grace as well. This is, again, a brand new concept for a lot of them. Learning is now becoming an active part and not a passive part, right? And so just make sure that, like, hard deadlines, like, no, just like what Monte said, every like 6th day, like everyone's going to do the mastery check. You can do it however you want to do it. There's really no right or wrong way. Modify it as you go. So if you started out with doing every 6th day a mastery check and you see that's not working, it's okay to change it, right? This is something that I always say all the time. Like, our students are so good at adjusting to changes. It's really us as teachers. And another thing that we were also talking about earlier was that you know, when you feel like you're running around trying to like put out little fires, right? Like make sure you just kind of take a step back. Like what Monty says, that students start taking ownership and being like, oh, I actually don't have a question. And we were trying to talk about like, you know, how students are so used to being passive learners. And then I reflected and I was like, you know, as teachers, we're so used to being the gatekeepers of the knowledge of everything, right? So like, we're so used to students coming to us and asking us questions, and then we just give them answers because that's easier. And Monty was also saying how, you know, at this point, you kind of had to shift your language. Like, you're not going to give them the answers. You're going to tell them, actually go back into your guided notes or go back into the video. Like everything you're asking, I've already provided that answer for you. Or I've provided something for you, but you need to be a self-directed learner at this point.
Yeah. And it sounds harsh, like from an outsider sometimes when like a kid comes to you and you're like, oh my gosh, Miss Woodard, like, can you tell me like whether or not like a cactus is a vascular or non-vascular plant? And I'm like, it's in your notes. And like, I say it just like that. Like, I don't engage. I'm like, it's in your notes, you know, and it does sound harsh, but the fact of the matter is that we took notes on it. I know you have it written down. If you don't have it written down, you need to find somebody. And part of why I do that though, is so that by the time, like, you know, we reach a certain point where they're coming to me and they're asking me genuine questions that they need, like actual things like, okay, Miss Woodard, so like I have my notes here and I know a cactus is a vascular plant, but can you tell me now, like, can we talk a little bit deeper about why? That's a different question. I'll engage now. But, you know, I try not to get myself caught up in those very minute, where do I find, it's the biggest question right now in my class, where do I find the link to this? Literally, kids now will intervene and be like, it's on the class calendar. Like they're annoyed because it's like, it's one of those things of like, you can answer this question on your own. And I think your kids will eventually get there, but you just got to be firm and like, don't necessarily give them the answers all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all, you know, it feels weird, right? Like we feel like we're not helping our students, but actually we are teaching them those skills that they need to excel for later on, right? So if it's something that's already provided for them, like get them to search for it, like whatever. Like I would always tell my students, go to 3 minutes in the video and you'll find it all on there. So that way it could be a little bit more scaffolded for students who need more scaffolding, so they don't have to rewatch the whole video. And so those are just some ways to make sure that just to make sure that you are continuing to help your students be self-directed learners. Another thing that we also talked about, and I think, let me see. Another thing that we were talking about are like absent students, right? This is a topic that we've been covering. So if you listen to the podcast, it's on there. We have an episode for that. We had a webinar for supporting absent students. And so again, I love this model because it doesn't matter where they are. They're going to continue going with their learning. So it could be at home, they have to like babysit their younger siblings, or like, oh, something happened in their family, they couldn't come to class. Like, learning doesn't happen just in class. Learning can happen everywhere. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, yeah. I agree. Like for example, tomorrow, half of my kids are out because we're going into a very short fall break and they're off Monday and Tuesday, as I am now off Tuesday as well. So, but half of them are missing, and, they come around with this little form that you have to sign saying what I need to work on. And now I can just write on there, hey, check the class calendar, because we keep a home doc of a calendar with dates, and I plug in like our resources for the day or whatever. And like kids know that's where they go to check the work, and they'll do it or they won't. Just really depends on the student. But the fact is that the learning doesn't have to stop. Like if they actively engage, they can still get the same stuff we're getting in class, which I like.
Yeah. And I think now thinking back on it too, right? Like for students who have to leave early or who come in late, not necessarily absent the entire day, like they could literally just pick up where they left off. And I think that's one less thing we got to stress out about as teachers. We no longer have to think about like catching up with that student. Yep. But however, right, we also want to say that like when they do come back in the classroom, you want to check in with that kid. If a student has been out for weeks at a time, you want to email and just engage them and just try to make sure that they're understanding the different types of skills and content that you are providing for them. So don't just be like, oh, the model is here, and not check in with students, right? Just make sure that you continue establishing that relationship and checking in with your students as well. Another thing too that I thought about, I know we're kind of like all over the place, and that's whatever.
Hopefully this is helpful though.
We're just like super excited to be together. So another thing that I was thinking about, when students are behind pace, don't be afraid to go ahead and email families, their advisory teacher, all the stakeholders involved. That's what I did from the get-go. Like I had the email sent to the student, but then I CC'd their family, the caseworker, the SPED teacher, my co-teacher, everyone. So everyone's on the same page. So they know, hey, like this child, like your student, like, I don't know what they're doing, but like we're supposed to be in this lesson, but they're not in that lesson. Yeah. Another cool thing that teachers have started doing too is that there's an email template, and I will link that here as well, where you can actually get the student to write the email themselves to their own like family members and like everyone else who's involved in their learning, just so that you don't have to write those emails. They'll just CC that to you. And so it's another skill where students are communicating why they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's no longer coming from you, it's actually coming from the student. So don't wait until like 2 weeks has passed and then you're like, oh my gosh, this kid is like 2 or 3 lessons behind. Like as soon as they're behind, like I would typically just send an email and be like, okay, like these are where the hard deadlines are. You didn't meet that hard deadline, or even the soft deadline. Like even this week, we only had 1 lesson this week and you just like did whatever you wanted. So open up those communication. And also I challenge you to balance it out with positive things. So if a student is behind and then they caught up, make sure to email right away or text or whatever it is saying like, hey, so-and-so did a really great job at catching up, just so that your families are not out of the loop of like, oh, but they haven't done anything, right?
Yeah. And what I also think is helpful too is like one of the things that I would do, like, once a week is I would have the kids write a summary of like, kids are actually very reflective. And so, I would have them fill out kind of like a form of like, I was engaged, always, usually, sometimes, make none. And different things. And I would have them write up like a few sentences of like, this is my performance this week in class. And I would have them CC me and send it to, again, the stakeholders. And part of the reason why I did that was because one of the things that has come up quite a bit is like, well, what do you do with the kids who are wasting time in class? One, for me, I'm a firm believer in like natural consequences. Like I document everything. So it's like, if you came in 3 days in a row and you decided that you just weren't going to work, I make sure to document that. So later on, when they're behind, I can communicate that when a parent reaches out and say, well, I'm concerned. But also too, for those kids, especially the ones that may not be as reflective when they're doing their review and they're writing it up, I'm like, please make sure you let your parents know that you came in 3 days this week and watched Pokemon, things like that. So I think don't be afraid to like intervene if they're off task. Like sometimes it's okay. Other times it's like, have them in that moment write an email home and say, hey, here's how I spent my time today in class. If they're struggling with how to write it, write it on the board. This is what you need to send in your email to your parents about your behavior in class today. And for me, like that has been a game changer in terms of like resubmitting work and things like that. I have them write this email being like, this is how much I studied. This is how much like I put in the work, and I make them be honest in it. And like most times parents don't come at me, they come at the child. Because again, it's all about the responsibility of the child. And, once you're able to help parents make that connection, a lot of times they like don't hassle you as much.
Yeah. And it's really great that way because, it makes it student centered, like all communications coming from the student as well. So they really are like just owning their learning. So then another question, Monte, what happens if kids are not listening to the videos?
Yeah. So another concern that we have is about like, well, they're not learning this stuff because they're skipping through the video. Again, for me, it's twofold. The first of which is natural consequence. They knew in my class. So we've also gotten quite a few questions about like, well, how much is too much to retake a mastery check? I think that's an individual decision for the teacher. For me, it was 2. You get 2 chances. You get to take it the main time. You go back, you reassess, you review, and you take it a second time. If you don't take it, whatever your grade is goes in as that. On the final assessment, whatever that is, you have an opportunity to rework that like content. And if you master it, I'll go back and change that master check grade. If you're still like struggling with it, unfortunately, we just didn't check the box off for right now with that one. And that's okay. I think one of the greatest things that we struggle with as teachers, like in a traditional class, my kids didn't master 100% of the standards. Like they really did not. Like, in fact, they probably mastered like 60%, like, and that's me being nice. I'm being serious. If I'm like really looking and thinking like 60% of the standards, they probably mastered. The other 40% is like, yeah, they maybe knew it. And I would say in my modern classroom, we were getting more mastered. But again, every child is not going to master every standard. In an ideal world, like a utopia, that would be the case. But unfortunately, there's just some things that are just, I don't even know as an adult, like World War II, can't tell you much about it. Did not master that history standard. And that's okay. I think the thing for me though is if a kid is not watching the videos, that shows up in their work later on. One of the things I'm really trying to get them to understand, and I know grading, and we're not going to go deep into grading at all, but I know like it also goes back to the whole grading thing. The reason why I don't necessarily need to put in all these grades and things like that is because, again, it's like, if you don't want to do the formative work, that's fine. But that summative assignment that comes up later on that is graded, we can then just pull and say, well, you know, this assignment that you told me you didn't want to do, it actually applied to this piece of the assessment. And so I think it's really about helping kids see the why behind things. And once they can see the why, they'll do it. Like this year, I've been, you know, I don't get much pushback. As soon as I'm like, well, this is why we're doing this, they're like, oh, okay, cool. Don't be afraid to tell your kids the why behind why you have certain assignments. And if kids are like, I don't understand the point, and you've explained it, and they're still like, maybe you need to go back and rethink that assignment, that's okay too. I've definitely dropped the ball with some of my assignments, and I'm like, this is busy work. Nobody needs to do this, Miss Woodard. Like, throw this out, you know, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and another thing that I do in my class too, like, so Monty has a limit of 2 for revisions, right? For me, my students were able to revise as often as they needed. The caveat though is like, I'm gonna grade it in my own time. So like you missed your deadline. So when I have time, I'm gonna take a look at it. But right now in the pacing tracker, it's just gonna be revised. And sometimes I'll tell my students, okay, remind me with an email saying that like, hey, Miss D, I made some revisions. Can you get back to it? But they know that I'm gonna do it on my own time. So they can't keep asking me about like, you know, hey, Miss D, what's my grade? Did I reach mastery? Whatever. Like they just knew I was gonna get to it, but it was on my time. So if you didn't meet the soft and hard deadline, like I'm busy. Like you're not about to like, you know, make me even busier because you didn't do it. You didn't do it when you had the time. And so when it comes to students not listening to videos, again, this is a new way of learning, right? Give them grace. It happens, right? Like our students get distracted. I'm an adult, I get distracted all the time. But I think it's really utilize platforms like Edpuzzle. Screencastify also has a way to, you know, put in questions as well. What I told my students is that they could not move forward until they reach a 70% in their Edpuzzle video. That's how I know you got majority of the content that I'm teaching. And so after they watch their Edpuzzle and they scored a 70%, then they can move forward to the guided practice. But they had to get a 70%. If not, like if some of them get 67%, I'm like, okay, we have to redo that. And so I would just reset their video and they'd have to review it again. But they just knew they couldn't move forward until they reach a 70%, which that could be an expectation as well. That grade never went into the grade book. My students never asked, like, Miss D, are you putting this in the grade? Like never, but they just knew that that was an expectation before they could move forward. So that's something that you could do. Another thing that Monty was saying, the why, especially in middle school, like middle schoolers are always like, why we got to do this, right? Instead of me coming up with a why, I would always just ask the students, why do you think we're doing this? And if they're like, oh, because it's busy work or whatever, then yeah, we need to reevaluate. But at the same time, they do come up with better answers than us. And so that's always really cool. So I always just turn the question around to the students, and so that they can come up with their own reasons as to why we're doing things the way that we're doing. So
and the other thing about that I really like about Edpuzzle too, it'll tell you the percent that they watch. And sure, I guess they can click around, but again, they still have to stop and answer those questions. And so it slows them down a little bit. And so I'm real petty about it. Like I'm real petty about it. I'll go into Edpuzzle and I'm like, excuse me, this says that you watched 67% of my video. And, you know, I tell them these take a lot of time to make, and like, you need to watch it. So like, you can go back now. And, you know, now they're making more work on themselves because now they have to go back because they're trying to figure out at what point they left off for it to record that like, they're not done. And so it's actually really funny because my boys, especially, they're like really good about it. Like, I'm done. Like, you're not done. It was a 6-minute video. It's been 3 minutes. Like, so I'm like real petty about it. I'm like, you at least got to sit for 6.5 minutes because the video is 6.5 minutes. And you can't do anything else until 6.5 minutes have passed.
And also just be really clear with boundaries, right? And expectations, like I said. There's been an issue with like, oh, well, students are just listening to music as they're listening to the video, and that's not possible. Like you can't listen to the music and the video. So just tell them like, hey, you know, not gonna happen. Like you can listen to the music when you're doing your independent work or your mastery check. That was what I did with my students, but they knew when it's video time, it is video time only. Like that is it, right? Like you have to focus on that. And so that's kind of like negotiating. Like they want to listen to music, bet like you can listen to music after the video. So I'm not saying no, but I'm giving you another opportunity to do that and not necessarily when you're watching the video, because that doesn't make any sense. And so just keeping that in mind too. I know that a couple of, teachers have asked, but like, what if students have already mastered the skill? Do they need to watch the video? Something that I tell my students all the time is like, hey, you know what? Like, watch this 5-6 minute video. You may already know this stuff, but it's a good refresher. It is good for you to review and to make sure that we're all on the same page in this class. And so my students have never pushed back on that. They're like, okay, got it, Miss D. Like, I already know what a theme is, but like, it's a good way to just kind of review. But you can allow your students to skip the video. For example, if you did like in your unit plan, right? Like you did a pre-test or whatever, and Canvas is really good at this, where if a student scored a certain score, they can just move forward to like their task and they don't have to watch the video. So you can really you can do whatever you want. Really just like modify it. You want to communicate it in a way that it makes sense to students, that it's a very positive way, and not necessarily like, you got to do this because I said you got to do it. Right? Like, you just have to be really mindful of what you're saying. Cause I feel like I bucket the system too. Like, if you're gonna tell me I need to do something or I can't do something, I want to be like, nah, like I'm gonna take my time and do what I want, because this doesn't make any sense to me. So just keeping that in mind as well. And we do, and I really like Monte's thing too. Like, she was completely honest, like videos take forever. If anything, like this is good process, like that takes a really long time. And we do want our students to get something out of the instructional videos. And so, but just, just think back and reflect and be like, okay, what's the purpose of this video? Does everyone need to watch it, or just a certain amount of kids need to watch it?
Yeah. And like going off of that, because they're sometimes like video, I try to keep my videos like to the important stuff. Like, I only do videos on instruction and like the important stuff. I try to make sure that I'm like not overloading them or anything like that, so that when they know it's a notes day or they're watching a video, they know that it means something.
Yeah.
And they're like walking away. And like the greatest thing that we can say here is like, trust the model, modify the model, take the parts that work for you, that work for your kids, that work for your classroom. You do not need to feel like this in the box teacher of like doing it exactly as written. They're guidelines, but it's never a catch all. You can do whatever you want. Like, even myself, this is my 3rd year, I think, using Modern Classroom, and I've done it a different way every year. And I modify it, and I take pieces that I really like, and I leave out the pieces that I'm like, yeah, it's not going to work for now. And that's okay. So if you feel that you're struggling, I saw someone's post saying they feel like a failure, which we never want any teacher to ever feel like that. I'm so sorry that you feel that. We never want that. If you're feeling like it's not working, modify, but trust your teaching, trust yourself.
Yeah, and you got this. And we really appreciate you being vulnerable in the group as well, sharing your challenges, your problems, and really just feelings. So we're hoping that this group continues to support one another, which you all have done such a beautiful job, by the way. Like, Monte and I just see the growth every day, and we're just so proud. And so continue to just trust the model, right? You know how people always say, trust the process, trust the model. The model will work for you however you want it to work, right? And so with that being said, if you are getting stressed out and overwhelmed, take your mental health days. Those are very, very important. And the beauty of this model is that the learning continues even when you're not there. You're no longer creating busy work for subs. You're no longer trying to make copies or like coming up with something that subs can do, or guest teachers. But essentially, like, your sub lesson plan, I know for me, I just said, talk to these group leaders, these student leaders, and then they'll tell you what everyone is doing. We've heard about teachers putting a video of their LMS so that the guest teachers know what the students are doing. And then for me, it's also just like classroom management. Like, hey, like this student, they're going to need a lot of like encouragement and reminders to stay on task. But for the most part, the content is still there. Like, students continue to learn. And so teachers, if you're overwhelmed, take those mental health days. If you want to go to a conference, go to that conference, because with this model, learning continues. It never pauses, which we absolutely love. And so with that being said, Monte, next steps?
As always, we do a Twitter chat, and we would love for more of you to come join us on Twitter at 7 p.m. on
the first Wednesday of the month.
The first Wednesday of the month. Right now, it is just Toni Rose and I talking to ourselves. So,
and you know, we can
please.
do that. We can keep doing that, but we would really love to see more of your faces in the Twitter
we
chat.
want to engage with you, and you know, we're trying to utilize Twitter because Twitter is the place for that. So join us.
And don't be afraid. Like, if you don't know what you're doing, that's okay. Like, Monte and I also don't know what we're doing.
And if you've been around since the early days, you definitely know we don't know what we're doing, because
it's been a blast, let me tell you.
Yeah.
And so follow at Modern Class Proj on Twitter to get more information. But with that, as Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus would say, take chances, make mistakes, and get messy. We will see you all next month, and we're just so excited for all of this.